While studying Slouching Towards Bethlehem and Kafka on the Shore, I noticed a theme at the core of both of the books that reflected on our unknown reliance on collectivism that dictated our individual will. And this caused me to question, to what extent is our sense of individualism a product of our context and culture? Within the passage Slouching Towards Bethlehem, there is an emphasis on the cultural divide and how that causes the generations to see each other in a different light, but there is a very clear illustration of how the outside is viewing the hippie movement in the late 60s, because that is where Didion's ingrained social norms resides. This is represented with the inconsistent syntax because it is very fluctuating with the generational view of the Haight movement, the Haight-Ashbury movement, and how they were viewed as this rushed inconsistency. In lines 1 through 3, it says, "The observers believed roughly what the children told them, that they were a generation dropped out of political action, beyond power games, that the new left was just another ego trip." I'd like to note that this sentence is has a very traditional syntax that is more structured and utilizes consistent pauses with the commas. In lines 3 through 8, "Ergo, there really were no activists in the Haight-Ashbury, and those things which happened every Sunday were spontaneous demonstrations because, just as the diggers say, the police are brutal and juveniles have no rights and runaways are deprived of their right to self-determination and people are starving to death on Haight Street, a scale model of Vietnam." This takes you out of breath because there is very few pauses, and the bulk of this sentence utilizes this technique that we have seen Didion use early on in the short story that creates a very rushed and reckless feeling that represents her entire motif that the center will not hold. As we move on to juxtaposed diction, there is a fluid shift that again represents her narrative reliability as she is more involved with this older generation that is, although she is affiliated with the Haight-Ashbury and experienced, she is part of this generation that is out on the outside looking in. And so, although this diction does shift with that, it has a more clear push and bias to the more reckless and negative connotation of the diction. And this is represented in lines 21 through 27. These were children who grew up cut loose from the web of cousins and great aunts and family doctors and lifelong neighbors who had traditionally suggested and enforced the society's values. They are children who have moved around a lot. San Jose, Chula Vista here. They are less in rebellion against the society than ignorant of it, able only to feed back certain of its most publicized self-doubts. Vietnam, saran wrap, diet pills, the bomb. Words like cut loose, San Jose, Chula Vista here's, saran wrap, diet pills, the bomb, that's where she is inserting her journalistic knowledge, as she did do it more investigative piece, because this is an essay, a journalistic essay. But she continuously brings the word children out of her vocabulary because, as I've said, her societal norms that she has grown up with that is causing her, she even notes that it's causing her to, her view of this Haight-Ashbury, and she is unsure how they ended up this way. So the word children represents this recklessness and how she says that they are ignorant of society and not rebelling. And this makes way for the paradoxical logic, the logos that she applies, because she is speaking to the theme that you're in, like, the severity of falling in line, and that your individualism is dictated by your context. As the Haight-Ashbury there, as she quotes in lines 31 through 37, they are waiting for the words. It says, "As it happens, I am still committed to the idea that the ability to think for oneself depends upon one's mastery of the language. I am not optimistic about children who settle for anything to indicate that their mother and father do not live together, that they come from a broken home. They are 16, 15, 14 years old, younger all the time, an army of children waiting to be given the words." this, as I was saying, represents the lack of individualism, but also how it's also paradoxical because she is speaking to this dictation while she is being motivated, and she is just a product of these social norms of this generation that is on the outside and judging this late 60s movement that although they are falling to this group behavior and lack of individualism, she is as well. In the book Kafka on the Shore, Murakami combines literary techniques to emphasize the ingrained reliance on a false yet inescapable universally applied narrative that drives our reading process. Murakami utilizes this fluctuating narrative to his advantage as he addresses intertext referencing in this dialogue sequence. In my passage, going to pull up. In lines 1 through 8, dressing up like Colonel Sanders fits your character too, but I don't have a character or any feelings. Shape I may take, converse I may, but neither God nor Buddha am I, rather an insensate being whose heart thus differs from that of man. What the? A line from Udic Carney's Tale of Moonlight and Rain. I doubt you've read it. Not only is the iconic Western figure that is Colonel Sanders speaking and delivering this dialogue to another character, Hoshino, in the book, he is also referencing a Japanese work that is bringing light this intertextuality that Murakami is clearly utilizing this like ironic tone to those understanding that. And we rely on, not only do books rely on intertextuality, we ultimately do, because we connect everything we see, and this is just the beginning of Murakami addressing and acknowledging our reliance as we, that it is influencing our reading process and what dictates our critical thinking. As we move into the explanatory dialogue that takes up this entire passage that I have chosen, Colonel Sanders is a Western icon that is embodying this more traditional character role, but in a very unprecedented way by delivering dialogue that is explaining the story to this character Hoshino that ultimately represents this reader insertion, because the magic realism that takes place in this entire book is not normal to us. So it's like Hoshino is a break for the reader, but ultimately bringing light to how we need to see ourselves in the story. And this explanatory dialogue is represented in lines 17 through 24. Hoshino said, I'm not sure I follow, but what you're saying is you're not a person and not a god or Buddha either, right? Neither God nor Buddha, just the incident as such of the good or bad in man I either inquire nor follow. Meaning, since I'm neither God nor Buddha, I don't need to judge whether people are good or evil. Likewise, I don't have to act according to standards of good and evil. This is something you would see being inferenced in a class in an analytical way, trying to make meaning of the text, but it's laid out for you by this main character in the book, which is not only does it bring irony to the undertones of it, but it's very confrontational and just bringing light to this breaking of structure that we so rely on because of this narrative, as Jillian was talking about these two generations being influenced individually and differently, Murakami is addressing it all together, as we are alike. And finally, this brings light to the logos, because this explanatory dialogue is being in the Murakami's way logically expressed, and to the Colonel Sanders very logically, because Murakami is ultimately Hoshino is, as I was saying, a reader insertion, and to Colonel Sanders, he is dismissed in a very judgmental tone. In lines 36 through 40, he is ending by explaining. The kind of books, please. I'm not much of a detail person. The technical term of it is for abbreviating sensory process of continuous information, but I don't want to get into all that. It'd take too long to explain, and I know it's beyond you, so let's cut to the chase. What I'm getting at is I'm not going to complain about either each and every little thing. Of course, if it accounts don't eventually balance, that is a problem. I do have my responsibilities to consider. Again, using that explanatory tone that is very ironic because we are we are forced to read like a very real account of what we are supposed to be inferring from the text. And because of this break in this narrative paradox that Murakami is bringing, it brings light to my global issue, as Didion's did as well. But as I was saying, in a more unified way, because we are ultimately a product of our culture and time, and Murakami is bringing this to light because it's more of a subconscious bringing to conscious, as he is pulling out this narrative that it's ingrained in us to want to see this more grand narrative and see ourselves in the characters and applying it to ourselves. And so he's using characters like Colonel Sanders to clearly address that in us and point it out to us, bringing that this confrontational tone and bringing light to the theme that we are a product of what we know in our context.